At 6 a.m., there was an anxious and insistent knock at the door. "Mitya," said his wife, "go and open the door. It must be for you." At the door stood a Red Army soldier, out of breath from his fast walking. "Comrade Battalion Commissar, you are ordered to report to headquarters immediately." Several hawks were circling above Minsk in the bright morning sky. The radio was announcing an air alert. A thought flashed through my mind. Apparently, the air defense drills have begun. Almost all the employees of the political propaganda department had already gathered. "What happened, comrades? Why were we called?" "Nothing is known yet," shrugged his shoulders Vasya Rudakov, a senior instructor of the organization and party department. From the office of the divisional commissar Lestev came out senior political officer Makhnachev. He looked excited. Slowly closing the door behind him, he said softly, "We received a report that the Germans are bombing Lida, Kobrin, Brest, Baranovichi." Lestev went to a member of the military council. "Now they will contact the armies and find out everything in detail." For a few minutes we were silent. Everyone was trying to comprehend the events, to understand what was going on. Someone went to the calendar hanging on the wall, tore off a leaf. It was 22 June 1941, an unremarkable Sunday afternoon. The first to break the silence was the inspector of the battalion Commissar Lundansky. "It can't be war. This is a major provocation or some kind of mistake. We have a non-aggression treaty with Germany." Battalion Commissar Litkin, measuring the room with big steps, objected. "You can expect anything from the fascists. Look how many countries they've already invaded. And I still think that the Germans will be afraid to oppose us." London stood his ground. "It is, too risky a step." I was sitting at the table, listening to my comrades, mechanically flipping through a puffy copy of Pravda. Suddenly, my attention was attracted by a large printed headline. "TASS Report." The headline had been underlined in blue pencil by someone. I remembered that on 14 June, when we received the newspaper with this report, we argued about how to understand it. Some were cautious in suggesting at the time that relations between our country and Nazi Germany were far from being as good as officially claimed. But the majority believed that the Nazis, at least in the near future, but dare to commit aggression against the Soviet Union. And how could one not believe it? The TASS report stated that the rumors about Germany's intention to break the pact and attack the USSR were devoid of any ground, that the transfer of German troops to our borders had nothing to do with Soviet-German relations. And now, the sudden bombardment of our cities. My thoughts, like everyone else's at those moments, were most contradictory. If it is not war yet, why are our cities being bombed? And if the war has begun, how and what should we, the workers of the political propaganda department of the district, do now? At 9 o'clock in the morning I, together with the battalion commissar Lundansky, was summoned by Lestev. He rose from the table, as always trim, clean-shaven, and said in a mundane voice, as if reporting something ordinary, "The war has begun. Our troops are already fighting near the border." Having uttered these words, Lestev looked at us intently, checking what impression his message had made. And the strange thing was that because Lestev answered the question that tormented us so calmly and simply, we immediately felt more confident, more collected, as if we had come to the chief's office to receive further instructions. Lestev's behavior, his tone seemed to say, first of all, calmness, orderliness, no confusion. With a movement of his hand, the divisional commissar invited us to the table, sat down next to us, and said in the same even voice, "We have no communication with the 10th Army. You will have to leave immediately by plane to Bialystok to understand the situation, to help the political propaganda department of the Army to establish political information, which must be very accurate." Tapping his fingers on the table, Lestev repeated, "Yes, very accurate, absolutely truthful. Stay in the Army until I call you back." Lestev was silent for a moment, rose and asked in a completely different tone, with a warm, slightly mocking smile, "How are you? Aren't you afraid?" We stood up, realizing that the conversation was over and we had to get down to business. "See you soon, comrades. I wish you success," said Lestiv, shaking hands with us. "Take my car and go to the aerodrome. The aeroplane is waiting for you." At 11 o'clock, a small, skittish U-2 left the ground, made a circle, and set a course for Bialystok. All the time we were flying from Minsk to Bialystok, I was thinking about how it happened that the war started suddenly for us. 3 days ago, on 19 June, we returned from Brest. We checked the state of party political work in the mechanized division. I remember how, together with the head of the division's political propaganda department, Regimental Commissar A.A. Illarionov, we sat in the commander's office and from the window looked through binoculars at the German soldiers walking on the opposite bank of the Western Bug. "I don't like this neighborhood. I don't like it very much," Alexei Alexeyevich said. "Everything seems that they are planning something." I tried to connect these words with the events of the last few days. The day before yesterday, we were warned to pack alarm suitcases, with which we usually went on exercises. In the suitcases, as always, it was required to have 2 changes of underwear, breadcrumbs, tinned food, a spoon, a fork, thread and needle, razors and other small, but extremely necessary things in the campaign. We stayed all night at headquarters and in the morning took care of routine business. Towards evening on Saturday, the divisional commissar Lestiv allowed everyone to go home. That was our last peaceful evening. Only a few hours passed, and everything changed. Without even saying goodbye to my family, I went on a combat mission. Will I ever see my family and friends again? And will I ever see them again? Battalion Commissar Vasia Lundonsky pushed me lightly in the shoulder and pointed downwards. Below us was Bialystok. To the right and left in the cloudless sky began to appear fluffy puffs of smoke with a white-yellow flash in the middle. Behind the noise of the engine we could not hear the sounds of bursts, but we realized that it was anti-aircraft artillery firing. Why were anti-aircraft gunners firing at our aircraft? Maybe the Germans are already in Bialystok. No, it's unbelievable. I looked down and noticed next to the small dragonfly shadow of our U-2, running on the ground another shadow, big and dark. It turned out that a Nazi bomber was flying above us. Yellow crosses were clearly visible on its planes. The anti-aircraft guns were firing at it. Our U-2 was coming in for landing. The cabin was falling down. The body felt unusually light. The ground was rapidly approaching. A push, and the aircraft rolled on the yellow, dusty grass. Deep craters from aerial bombs were blackened on the field. Near the hangars burned out a few machines that did not have time to take to the air. In the political propaganda department of the 10th Army, we found only 3 instructors. The rest of the workers had already left for the field control center. We went there as well. The head of the political propaganda department, Brigade Commissar Ivanov, met us unfriendly. He had not yet fully understood the situation. Gloomily and very briefly, Ivanov reported that the left flank of the 5th Rifle Corps was attacked by 3 enemy army corps and was fighting hard. There are reports that the 113th Rifle Division is hastily withdrawing. The enemy is particularly strong pressure in the junction between the 1st and 5th Rifle Corps. Army Commander Major General K.D. Golubev decided to put into battle 13th Mechanized Corps. That's all I can report so far, finished the brigade commissar. And now get in the car. We are changing the CP. Staff cars began to pull out of the forest. No camouflage measures were observed, and the enemy planes took advantage of it. They impudently and with complete impunity were snooping over the roads. Hitler's pilots, aspiring to cause panic besides bombs, dropped bundles of empty tin cans and switched on nasty howling sirens. Along the roads, the inhabitants of Bialystok were walking. Mothers clutched their crying children to their breasts. During the day, the Army headquarters moved several times from place to place. Communication with the troops was unreliable. About the situation of some units knew nothing at all. In the evening, not far from the Army headquarters, the fascists landed a paratroopers. 3 parachutists got lost in the forest, and they were captured by our Red Army soldiers. I saw enemy soldiers for the first time. They held themselves rather self-confidently, 3 healthy, shoulder-bearing guys in overalls, with sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The Red Army soldiers were looking with interest at the short-blued automatic rifles captured from the fascists. Our soldiers treated the prisoners kindly, gave them porridge. There was no real hatred for the enemy yet. For the night I settled down together with Vasia Lundonsky and 2 workers of the political propaganda department of the army in a tent, spread out on the edge of the forest. I didn't sleep well. I went outside and stopped under a tree. In the neighboring village, dogs were barking alarmingly, and from the dark sky came the intermittent, strained murmur of engines. German aeroplanes were coming again. Here it is, the first night of the war, I thought. And how many more such restless nights and days are ahead? I wonder what trace they will leave in the memory. And what if we help memory start keeping a diary, just like that for myself, from the first, and if I succeed, until the last day of the war. I returned to the tent, lit a candle, took out a thick notebook from my field bag, and made the first short entry in it. In the morning, Lieutenant General I.V. Bolden, Deputy Commander of the Western Front, arrived at Army headquarters. The plane on which he was flying was shelled by the Nazis. The general was wounded, but fortunately, quite easily. General Bolden was ordered to lead a cavalry mechanized group consisting of the 11th Mech Corps of the 3rd Army, the 6th Mech Corps, and the 36th Cav Division of the 10th Army. The group should strike in the direction of Bialystok, Lipsk, destroy the enemy on the left bank of the Niemen. This task was not easy. What it cost only to concentrate the group. The 36th Cav Division, for example, was somewhere in the area of Volkovisk, about 70 kilometers from the planned deployment line. After lunch I was called Brigade Commissar Ivanov, and still glumly said, "Well, here's what. The head of the political propaganda department of the 31st Tank Division, Davidov, and his deputy were killed. You will have to replace Davidov. There is no one else." But I was sent here by Divisional Commissar Lestov with a specific task. I objected. "What other task is there?" Angrily muttered Ivanov. "You spent the day with us. And what was the use? You can see for yourself. The situation is unclear. I think you should go. You will be more useful in the division." I realized that Ivanov was right, but I asked him again, "What about my mission?" "Again you about your own." Ivanov finally got angry. "All right, I'll coordinate the matter with Lieutenant General Bolden." We went to Bolden together. His wounded arm was resting on a wide bandage and was evidently very sore. The general supported it with his healthy hand, rocking it slightly, as if he were cradling a child. After listening to Brigade Commissar Ivanov, Bolden asked me, "And how do you feel about this appointment?" I replied that I was proud of it and would do my best to cope with the new responsibilities. But I am concerned that in this case I will not fulfill the assignment of Divisional Commissar Lestov. "Let it not worry you," said Bolden. "Go to the division and take up your post. Comrade Lestov I will inform about your new appointment." But where is the 31st Tank Division? Where to go? Nobody could explain that to me. First of all, it was necessary to find the 13th Mech Corps, which included the division, but there was very limited and contradictory information about the position of the corps. It was only known that it was involved in heavy defensive fighting west of Bielsk, covering Bialystok from the south. He headed towards Bielsk. For almost 2 days it had to drag along country lanes and forest roads, crowded with troops and refugees. Dozens of times, risking to arouse suspicion by my persistence, I unsuccessfully asked oncoming commanders about the location of the headquarters of the 13th Mech Corps. Finally, tired and exhausted, I arrived at a small village and decided to stop for the night. To my luck, it turned out that it was there that the headquarters I had been looking for so long was located. The Regimental Commissar Kirillov, head of the political propaganda department of the Corps, was glad to see me. He invited me to have dinner with him. At the table, he tortured me with questions. Where is the Army headquarters now? What do they think in the political propaganda department? Tell me, tell me. And what could I tell if I left the Army in the evening of 23 June? During that time, its headquarters must have moved more than once. So they also ride. Shook his head Kirillov. Bad, very bad. Do not feel a firm hand. Here we are the 4th day of the war, without receiving any instructions from above. We act at our own risk. There's no communication with our neighbors either. The overall situation is unclear. Kirillov excitedly walked across the room, struck a match, lighting a light. You know that the Corps is fighting hard, continued the regimental commissar. The losses are considerable. We don't have enough tanks, and those that we have are mostly combat training, obsolete types. Divisions deployed to fight along the Nuritz River, but now in some places have already withdrawn to the east. Maybe things are going better on other parts of the front. By the way, have you read the bulletin for the 22nd of June? No, I haven't had time yet. Here, take it, read it. We received it on the radio. In the summary of the General Command for the first day of the war, it was said that the enemy was repulsed everywhere, with heavy losses for him, and only in the Grodno direction achieved minor tactical successes. It was mentioned about active actions of our fighters. Somewhere nearby we heard strong explosions. The glass in the window rang. The flame in the paraffin lamp flickered restlessly. What is it? Warehouses with fuel and ammunition are exploding. Kirillov answered. It's near Belsk. Recently there was a strong raid. The town is still on fire. Even from here you can see the flames. The night passed, in general, quietly, and at dawn I went on a motorbike to look for the 31st Tank Division. Kirillov showed on the map where it was located. It came out southwest of Bielsk. In fact, the division had withdrawn after an unsuccessful counterattack. I found its headquarters and political propaganda department only in the evening. I introduced myself to the division commander, Colonel Sergei Andreevich Kolikovich, with whom I used to serve in the 4th Tank Brigade. I also knew well the Chief of Staff of the division, Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Vasilievich Lebedev, from my service in the same brigade in 1938, where he was the commander of the 2nd Tank Battalion and I was the secretary of the party bureau. It's good that they sent you to us, Dmitry Ilyich, Kolikovich said. When Davidov was killed, I thought, who will be appointed in his place? The situation, you understand, God forbid. There is no communication with either the Corps or the Army. I send officers, and they either don't come back or report that the headquarters have been relocated to some unknown place. Lo, gaunt Kolikovich spoke hotly, and from this his slight Belarusian accent was more noticeable than usual. It was felt that the colonel was a little confused, depressed by the unexpectedly difficult situation. I'll tell you frankly, continued Kolikovich, the division, in fact, is not prepared for combat. Parts of the personnel are not fully staffed. In addition, a lot of young Red Army, drafted only 2 months ago. We have not had time to receive combat vehicles. We have only a few twin-tower training vehicles. In short, we are now fighting as a rifle unit. Chief of Staff Lebedev, also short, but shouldered and strong, assessed the situation more calmly. Whatever it is, but we are fighting. We took part in the counterattack. That's when Davidov died. Actually, the strike did not work, but still we forced the Hitlerites to move back a few kilometers. Well, then they pulled up the reserves and Lebedev waved his hand. In general, then it turned out so that we had to withdraw. Now we are entrenched, holding defense, but the flanks are open. Where do you intend to start? Kolikovich asked me. I'll go to the units. I have to talk to people, explain the situation to them. Kolikovich grinned unhappily. You yourself are not clear about the situation. How will you explain it? Victory in the war is won not by one division, not by one army, and not even by our Western Front, I objected. And there is no doubt that the victory will be won despite our first failures. It is necessary to strengthen the fighters' confidence in their strength, the belief that the enemy can not only beat, but also defeat, are those who distinguish themselves in the battles known. Of course, said Lebedev, I can name a few names, and in the units you will name many. Hear about these first heroes, about our small successes, in my opinion, and must now tell people. And it is also necessary to establish radio reception of reports of the General Command. Well, perhaps you're right, Commissar. Go ahead, agreed Kolikovich. Commissar. No, I wasn't Commissar. I was appointed head of the political propaganda department, but the winged, proud word Commissar, born in the years of the Civil War, in those first days of fighting with the Hitler invaders, I had already heard more than once. People remembered the role of commissars, political leaders in the army, in the difficult time of formation of the young Soviet state, and when again a deadly danger loomed over the motherland. They expected that commissars in the name of the party would again raise the morale of the troops and ensure victory. A little time passed, and the institution of military commissars was indeed introduced in the army. Life urgently demanded that the political officer was involved in everything. He was engaged in the deployment of party and Komsomol forces, took care of supplying the troops with ammunition and food. Together with the commander discussed all the options for action of the unit, and along with him was responsible for the timely and correct communication to the performers of the combat task, for the course and outcome of each battle. The division slowly, with persistent fighting, retreated, still having no communication either with the court headquarters or with the army headquarters. The personnel suffered significant losses. Open flanks increased the danger of encirclement. In the rear had already appeared enemy parachutists. Here and there suddenly there was shooting. On 26 June, the commander of the medical unit reported that in the rear of us on the highway saw Nazi tanks, which in a marching column moving to the east. Colonel Kolikovich became alarmed. What shall we do, Commissar? Viktor Vasilievich, how are we with transport? Lebedev pulled out a notebook, scrawled with some hieroglyphics he alone understood, and reported. The division now has 3 passenger cars, 20 transport vehicles, and 2 armored cars armed with 45mm guns. I believe that it is necessary to withdraw quickly, to break away from the enemy, made a decision Kolikovich. I agreed. What else could be done in such a situation? In the division remained a strong, combat-ready backbone. It had to be preserved at all costs. Kolikovich leaned over the map. He thought something over, then announced, "We will withdraw to Belovskaya Pusha. Viktor Vasilievich, give orders to the regiments." Actually, there were no regiments in the division. There were groups of armed men, each of which was something between a company and a battalion. We decided to pour the rest of the patrol from cars and transport vehicles into armored vehicles before the withdrawal. The equipment, deprived of fuel, had to be destroyed. We burned all the documents of the political propaganda department. I did not raise my hand only on the blank forms of party tickets. After a little hesitation, I tied them up with twine and put them in my duffel bag. Then I tore the rubber sticker off the seal for party documents and slipped it into my watch pocket. To the 2 surviving members of the department he ordered, "Go to the units. Explain to the people why we're pulling out. Tell them that now, more than ever, we need organization and discipline. We'll withdraw in full order, on foot." I myself, too, having thrown a rather heavy duffel bag over my shoulders, went to one of the regiments. We moved all night. Contrary to expectations, we managed to break away from the enemy without much difficulty. Hitlerites, intoxicated by the first successes, poorly conducted reconnaissance and did not immediately discover our withdrawal. At dawn we entered the village. It seemed to have died out. Not even the barking of dogs was heard. Behind the village we could see a grove. Beyond that, a wide field. And then, 3 kilometers away, there was a solid green wall of a huge forest. We thought that this was Belovskaya Pusha. People were very tired. We decided to take a break in the grove, having seconded a small detachment to search for food. All of them, Except for the observers, as soon as they entered under the shade of trees, they immediately fell down on the ground damp from the morning dew. In 2 hours our procurers arrived. They brought 2 cows found in an empty village, rot potatoes, and onions. Fires were lit. Breakfast promised to be good. But in war you never know what will happen to you even in a few minutes. The meat in the cauldrons had not yet had time to boil when the observers reported that enemy tanks with a troop of machine gunners were approaching the grove. Behind the tanks there was a puff of dust. Probably the infantry was coming. At the same time bullets clicked on the trunks of trees. A shell burst scattered the fire, overturned kettles with undercooked soup. Colonel Kolakovich ordered to take a circular defense. It would be necessary to break through to Belovskaya Pusha, but how to retreat through the open field? A firefight ensued. The tanks did not go into the grove. They stopped at the edge of the forest, and from there sent shell after shell almost at random. It did us no great harm, but there was a lot of noise. But the machine gunners were persistently climbing forward. The fight lasted for 2 hours. At last Hitlerites stopped attacks. The shots were silent. Not otherwise, as something they prepare, said Kolakovich. And it is true, soon from different ends of the grove to the sky rose clubs of black smoke. The fascists decided to smoke us out. They set fire to the forest. Every minute the smoke was getting more and more. Sparks flew in the wind. The ring of fire was slowly but steadily shrinking. We retreated to the middle of the grove, and the fire followed us. The situation was desperate. The only thing left was to make an attempt to break through. Through the field, separating the grove from the forest, flowed a small river. Having consulted, we decided to break through to the place where the wooden bridge was humped. Kolakovich gathered the men. We created a shock unit, which was to be the first to break through the enemy's ring and give the others a chance to carry the wounded. Many communists volunteered to join this strike group. Kolakovich headed it. Under the cover of smoke, we managed to break through by a sudden blow and almost without losses to move back to the river. We crossed the bridge to the opposite bank. There are still 2 kilometers to the forest, so it is necessary to leave a barrier at the river, which could delay the Hitlerites pursuing us. I'll stay to cover the withdrawal, I told Kolakovich. The colonel did not object. He only said, "Take into account, the matter is dangerous." 70 men remained with me. Kolakovich divided the rest into 2 groups. One led himself. The other was entrusted to lead the chief of staff Lebedev. "Wait for a liaison from me," Kolakovich said in farewell. "I'll tell you in what direction to withdraw to meet us." "Well, bye." He shook my hand, turned abruptly and went to the waiting fighters. I looked after him. Kolakovich walked with a firm, confident gait. No, now he was not the same as I had seen him a few days ago, when I came to the division. The unexpected beginning of the war, the uncertainty of the situation, the heavy losses suffered by the units in the first battles, briefly knocked him out of the rut. Now he has regained the hardness necessary for a commander. He had a clear goal, to preserve the remnants of the division, take people out of the encirclement. Kolakovich no longer waited, and did not ask for instructions from anyone, acted vigorously, decisively, without hesitation. On the shore in the advancing dusk tinkled shovels. The soldiers who remained with me were hastily tearing off the cells. I sent 2 men to set fire to the bridge. It would be dark soon. At the edge of the grove appeared enemy machine gunners. I'm transmitting along the chain. Open fire only on my command. The fascists were coming at full height. Some of our men were getting nervous. What are we waiting for? A sergeant crawled up. Reported that he was sent by the division commander. Kolakovich orders us to start the withdrawal. Inform the colonel that I'll be delayed another 20 minutes. As soon as it gets dark, we'll move at once. Talking to the contact, I kept my eyes on the approaching fascists. I chose a bush about 100 meters from our trenches. Only Hitlerites will reach it. I'll order to open fire. And now the first German soldier approached the bush. It's time. A not very slender volley rang out. The fascist chain lay down. In the thickening darkness flashed the lights of machine gun bursts. Above the bridge at first smoke was billowing. Then flames appeared. The dark surface of the river glowed with scarlet reflections. We began to retreat by running over to the right and left, without stopping firing. The forest, which appeared from afar as a solid wall, turned out to be a narrow strip, which we crossed in a few minutes. It turned out to be a long way to Belovskaya Pusha. For an hour we walked along a deserted road winding through the woods. At last a village appeared ahead. The reconnaissance reported that it was empty. All the inhabitants had evacuated. Kolakovich was not there either. We set up on the square in front of the village hall. I sent scouts in all directions to look for the commander. Suddenly a blindingly bright rocket flew up into the sky, and immediately shots rang out from the windows of houses, from attics, from barns, from where the enemy appeared. What is his number? It is not known. But it is necessary by all means to stop the confusion that seized the fighters, to organize a fight back. I shout as loud as I can. Get down. Grenades to battle. A few brave men immediately understood what was required. They crawled to the houses from which the fascists were firing. Grenade bursts rumbled. The shooting weakened a little. Throwing grenades into the windows and attics, we ran down the narrow streets. With difficulty I managed to gather my group behind the village. The scouts reported that the division commander and the chief of staff were a kilometer away. Soon I met them again. All those who remained in the division were together again. Successfully escaped, praised Kolakovich. We will move further along the edge of Belovskaya Pusha. We will not go deeper into the forest. We might lose our way. We have been traveling eastwards for several days now. The front has considerably moved away, and we are in the enemy's rear. The scouts observed Hitler's tanks and cars moving along the highway, which was 3 kilometers from the edge of the forest. The inhabitants of the surrounding villages reported that the Nazis had already visited them. All this forced to be on the alert, every minute to expect a meeting with the enemy. And yet the meeting happened suddenly. It almost ended in the death of our whole detachment. It happened on the 2nd or 3rd of July. After the usual night march we were looking for a place to rest, when suddenly machine gun and mortar fire fell on us. The soldiers scattered into the bushes. What do you think, Kochetkov, to break through or to take the defense? Kolakovich asked. I think we should break through. The Germans are behind us too. As last time, we divided the fighters into 3 groups. The left flank was headed by Lebedev, the center, Kolakovich. I led the right flank. We rushed forward amicably, but somewhat prematurely. The attack, launched from afar, collapsed. Fighters lay down under fire, not having run to the enemy. In addition, in a thick bush, my group deviated to the right and broke away from Kolakovich's group. My machine gun ran out of cartridges. I inserted a new magazine, the last one. Nearby a fighter lay face down on the ground. Why don't you shoot? The soldier is silent. I lifted his head. His face was covered with blood. He was already dead. I hear someone shouting. Commissar. Germans on the right. I ordered to withdraw to the left to the forest. There were no more than 30 fighters left in my group. But now and then we met Red Army soldiers and commanders from other units in the forest. They joined us, and by evening more than 100 men had thus gathered. I called all the commanders and political workers. Their opinion was unanimous, with the onset of darkness to break through further. People were divided into platoons. Platoon leaders were appointed. I ordered to move without noise, not to open fire, if a rocket takes off, to lie down. In case we found the enemy, do not move back. Attack bravely and friendly. During the night we were joined by another 50 people. The organized detachment attracted to itself scattered fighters and commanders, like a magnet iron dust. All the new arrivals I put them into one platoon. Lieutenant Petrakov was appointed commander. He had a fighting look. His cap was dashingly shifted to the back of his head, a trophy automatic rifle on his neck, and an hour later I was informed that Petrakov and his men split off from the detachment and went somewhere to the right. Did he decide to fight his way out on his own? I regretted that I had entrusted Petrakov with my men. It was already past noon when the lieutenant and his platoon rejoined the detachment. It turns out that they really decided to go on their own, but came across the headquarters of a German tank unit. They were fired upon. I strongly scolded Petrakov for indiscipline and removed him from command of the platoon. The lieutenant silently listened to the remark and got lost in the crowd of soldiers. Then I caught another glimpse of him. He was walking glumly in the tail of the squad. According to the intelligence report, in the village, which was on our way, there were tank and infantry units of the enemy. It was possible to bypass the village only on the left, through a swamp overgrown with low bushes. We walked in a chain, knee-deep, and in some places waist-deep in dark brown mud. Everyone was so covered with mud that they didn't recognize each other. I walked ahead of them and heard disgruntled voices behind me. "Where are we going? We are going to lose here in the swamp." I tried to encourage the people. "There's not much left. Soon the swamp will end, and there's a dry forest where we can rest." And then suddenly Petrakov appeared in front of me, as if from under the ground. Pointing at me, he shouted, "Don't believe him. This is not a commissar, but a fascist spy. He'll lead us all to the Germans. Come with me. I'll lead you out." The Red Army stopped in confusion. Who to believe? Even the men of the 31st Tank Division did not know me well, especially those who had joined the detachment. Deputy Political Officer Kostin stepped towards me. "Who are you? Show me your documents," he said sternly, and his hand reached for his holster. The situation was difficult. The words of the alarmist made the soldiers hesitate. Something had to be done immediately. I took my party ticket out of my pocket and, raising it above my head, exclaimed, "Comrades Red Army, you ask who I am. I answer you. I am a communist, and as long as my heart beats, I will be loyal to the end to Lenin's party. This man is an alarmist and a provocateur. He's already broken discipline today. He wanted to split our squad. He's trembling for his own skin. We have no pity or sympathy for such people. Let's move forward with courage. We'll make it to our own." I was interrupted by the pop of a pistol shot. The alarmist swayed, grabbing a young birch tree. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into the muddy swamp water. Who fired? Aya. Deputy Political Officer Kostin stepped forward. "A dog's death is a dog's death. Don't mess with the panickers." That's right. There were cheers of approval. "We believe you, Commissar. Let's follow you." It was already dark when we finally entered the dry forest. Here a group led by the Communist Senior Lieutenant Sarkisian joined our detachment. Our detachment grew to 200 men. Sarkisian's fighters had some breadcrumbs and shared them with us. The mood of the people rose. In the morning we crossed the motorway. Telegraph wires stretched along it. We cut them in several places and went deep into the forest again. Beyond the forest, a wide field of rye opened up. The rye swayed in the wind. To the right, a high rise. To the left, a village. People could be seen on the high rise. I couldn't make out who they were even with binoculars. I sent 3 scouts there. We waited for their return for more than an hour, but they didn't come back. We decided to move towards the forest by a gully. When we were almost halfway there, we were shot at from the heights and from the village. Without stopping, supporting the wounded under our arms, we hurried to the forest. We made it. I was bloody thirsty, but there was no water. The soldiers pounced on hare cabbage, small sour leaves, but how could they quench their thirst? Fortunately, they came upon a forester's hut. In it, a whole wealth, a sack of flour, millet, onions. The cellar is full of potatoes, but the most important thing, there's a well in the yard. Never, it seems, never drank such tasty water. We bandaged the wounded. We cooked lunch, or rather dinner, and, except for the men assigned to the guard, everyone went to bed. I appointed Sarkisian as chief of staff. I like this swarthy, black-eyed Southerner by his direct, frank character, hot hatred to the enemy. But only our plans for the further actions of the detachment at first turned out to be different. "Why are we going east?" Sarkisian said passionately. "Doesn't it matter where to beat the enemy? Let's create a partisan detachment. We will smash the enemy's communications, disrupt communications, attack garrisons. In short, we'll give the enemy a fun life. Shall we do that, Commissar?" "No, Comrade Sarkisian. I think we should fight our way back to our own. We're all soldiers. Our place is in the regular army." "I don't agree." Sarkisian was getting hot. "Whether we will break through to our own people or not is, as the Russians say, a grandmother's fortune-telling. But this is the right thing to do. We'll start fighting tomorrow. Or even today, damn it." "It's not so simple, Comrade Senior Lieutenant." I cooled Sarkisian's ardor. "Who are partisans? First of all, they are local people who know the surrounding forests, paths, swamps. They are closely connected with the population. They have relatives, nephews, matchmakers in every village. And us. Will they trust us? Can we quickly gain the full support of the collective farmers? And where is the guarantee that there are no weak spirits in the detachment, people who are ready to go even to betrayal? Well, the main thing is that we have a direct order to fight our way to our own. This is our duty, and we must fulfill it." Sarkisian fell silent, thought for a moment. Then he said, "Perhaps you are right, Comrade Battalion Commissar. We must break through." The days dragged on. We persistently went to the east, but still we did not hear the thunder of guns, a sure harbinger that the front line is close. For half a month of fighting, our troops retreated far from the border. And not so long ago we were sure that we would fight only on the enemy's territory. And nevertheless, even then, sneaking through forests and swamps from the enemy encirclement, exhausted, hungry, everywhere observing great successes of the enemy, we all did not doubt for a minute in our final victory. People had boundless faith in their party, knew that our country was indestructible, were convinced that we would be able to recover from the first setbacks and defeat the Nazis. We obviously lacked combat experience. Sometimes we forgot about vigilance. We were too trusting. Often for these mistakes we had to pay dearly. One of such mistakes is especially memorable to me. Once after a long night crossing, when the detachment stopped for a rest, I spread a tent on the ground and fell asleep. I was awakened by loud laughter. I opened my eyes. The sun was shining brightly over the forest. In its rays the flames of our fires are almost invisible. Only bluish smoke drifts between the trees. At the nearest fire among the fighters I saw an unfamiliar lieutenant colonel with a narrow, gaunt face and temples touched with gray. Beside him lay the overcoat of a German officer. The pistol and the flask hanging on his belt were also trophies. Even the lieutenant colonel's boots were German, with short, wide shanks, on thick soles with metal spikes. When I approached the fire, the lieutenant colonel stood up. He recommended himself as the commander of the rifle regiment and with unpleasant self-confidence volunteered to lead our detachment. "You are a political officer, and it must be difficult for you to command," he said, looking at my arm stars. "And where is your regiment, Lieutenant Colonel?" I asked. "Yes, it so happened in the turmoil of the first battles that my regiment was surrounded and I had to get out alone. I've been wandering in the woods for a second week and I can't find my regiment. I killed a fascist officer on the way, got some stuff and weapons from him. But what do I mean alone? This man seemed false to me. However, I allowed him to join the detachment, though at first as a private soldier." The lieutenant colonel agreed without objection, which somehow did not fit well with his original intention. The night passed. A new day came. The squad was still in the forest at rest. The lieutenant colonel shaved thoroughly, put on all his gear, and announced, "I'm going to check the sentries." No one had given him the task, but I didn't object. It's never a bad idea to check the guards once in a while. More than an hour passed. The lieutenant colonel didn't come back. It was beginning to worry me. Sarkisian and I went to look for him in the forest. The forest was magnificent. 100-year-old oaks stood among thick hazel trees growing on the slopes of a small high-rise. Below, at the foot of the high-rise, there was a small house and a barn. Further on, a field. A village could be seen in the distance. On the other side of the hill there was a motorway. Yes, in times of peace, one could have a good rest here. But now the beauty of nature did not entice us. Sarkisian and I were convinced that we had stopped at a very unfavorable place. The detachment was as if on a small island. If the Germans discovered us, it would be difficult to retreat. Lieutenant Colonel was nowhere to be found. Sarkisian stated unhesitatingly. This man did not inspire any confidence in me from the very beginning. Who is he? What if he was sent by the Germans? I kept silent. Sarkisian was right. We showed inexcusable carelessness. We didn't even check the documents of a stranger. And in a few minutes the enemy opened fire from all sides on our high-rise. The squad was trapped. We took a circular defense. Hitlerites lay down in a hazel tree. A group of fascist soldiers approached the hut at the foot of the heights. Sarkisian ran past me with a grenade in his hand. After him, the soldiers rushed down the hillside to the hut. The daring counterattack was successful. We managed to knock the fascists out of the house and the barn. They retreated into the field, but Hitler's machine gunners were still attacking us from behind and from the flanks. Sarkisian returned with a torn sleeve. Probably, he had caught on a sharp ball on the run. Breathing heavily, he reported. Comrade Commissar, to the left of us to the forest stretches a narrow strip of shrubbery. We have to sneak along it to the motorway, and then we'll leave. I nodded my head in agreement. Indeed, it was the only way to slip out of the ring. Not everyone managed to get away. The Germans were combing the woods and bushes. Here and there were heard shots, grenades bursting. It was fought back the fighters who had not had time to move away and who were discovered by Hitlerites. The trigger of my gun is cocked. 1 cartridge in the channel of the barrel, 2 in the clip. I'll keep the last of the 3. That's how it turns out. Not even a month has not passed since the beginning of the war, and for the last time I have to keep the last cartridge for myself. But so far I've been lucky. The cartridge remained in the clip, and I didn't want to die. In moments of acute danger, you start to feel with special acuteness how good life is. A lot of thoughts run through your head. You remember even small details of old insignificant events. This time, for some reason, I remembered the Minsk Park of Culture and Recreation on a warm summer day. I am playing with my 3 daughters. Then I call my wife to the maternity hospital, congratulate her on her newborn son, Sergei. The shooting stopped. Sarkisian appeared near me again. I rejoiced at him as if he were my own. He really became a close person for me during these days, a reliable assistant, a faithful comrade in arms. I looked at him carefully. On the swarthy face of the senior lieutenant, his cheekbones stood out sharper, black stubble on his unshaven cheeks became more noticeable. Sarkisian smiled sadly. Well, Comrade Commissar, we'll have to assemble the detachment again. We never met the unfamiliar lieutenant colonel with gray temples again. Whether he was sent by the fascists or not, we could not find out either. But we realized that we had made a serious mistake, even too. We had trustingly met a stranger and carelessly chosen a resting place. The lesson turned out to be cruel. The next resting place was inspected with special care. Sarkisian sent scouts in all directions before finally positioning the detachment for rest. This time we did not seem to be in danger of a sudden attack. We stopped in a dense forest. The crowns of trees were closing over our heads, and even at noon there was semi-darkness below. Mosquitoes buzzed annoyingly. The cobwebs between the branches were silvery. The soldiers lay down on the fluffy moss. Many took off their shoes to rest their weary feet. And suddenly the sound of music. It was so unexpected, so out of keeping with the solemn silence of the forest wilderness, that everyone jumped up faster than if they had heard close shots. The sentries reported that the Germans had set up a powerful radio reproducer at the edge of the forest. After each record played, there was a short pause, then the hum of a switched-on microphone, and someone shouting in broken Russian. Soldats and commanders of the Red Army, you have been deceived by the rulers of the Kremlin. German troops are advancing. The Red Army is defeated. Resistance is not useful. Come out of the forests, throw down your weapons, destroy the commissars. German commanders guarantee you life and return to your families after the war. One of the Red Army men lifted himself up and shouted loudly, "And you don't want it, Dick, you fascist bastard." A friendly laughter spread through the forest. It pleased me very much. It means that the soldiers had not lost their spirit. Immediately I talked to the communists, advised them to hold short talks before the march about what fascism brings to the Soviet people. I had hardly had time to finish briefing the communists when they brought in a Red Army soldier in civilian clothes. He called himself a scout from Colonel Mission's detachment, which had supposedly camped near us. Not trusting the stranger too much, I with 5 Red Army men went in search of this detachment. The scout was not deceived. There was indeed a small detachment of 70 men near us. I introduced myself to the colonel. We checked each other's documents. Grigory Fotivich Mission, born in 1899, member of the All-Union Communist Party of 1920, Chief of Communications of the 5th Rifle Corps. I liked the organization and discipline in his unit. People were tightened up, shaved. Many of them had clean collars sewn on their uniforms. We decided to unite our forces. I proposed to Colonel Mission, as a senior in rank, to take command of the united detachment. He refused. "You have more men. They're used to you. You take command, and I'll be the deputy." And so it was agreed. We set off in the direction of Volga Obrovskaya, through the village of Korokin, which was situated on the shore of a large lake. We camped for the day in the forest not far from the village. We took turns to bathe and wash the laundry. But as soon as the first group undressed and entered the water, fascist planes came. They descended to 100 meters and fired machine guns at the bathers. From the bullets, as from rain, circles went on the calm water of the lake. Several people, including me, swam away. The rest, together with Mission, jumped ashore and threw themselves into the coastal bushes. After the aeroplanes flew away, those who were hiding came out red, exactly from the bath. It turns out that the bushes were full of nettles. And then, at the most inopportune moment, when the victims were desperately swearing and everyone else was laughing at them, 4 peasants came. They stopped on the bank and stared bewildered at the fiercely scratching fighters. I approached the peasants. "Who are you, comrades? What do you want here?" The peasants reported that there was a traitor in the village, helping the Nazis. He had already handed over to the Nazis several people who disapproved of the new order. According to his denunciations, Hitler's soldiers searched houses, took away bread and cattle. I was surprised that the request of the peasants to rid them of the traitor was very persistently supported by the local priest, a frail old man with a sparse blue beard. "This is not a man, but a stinking dog, a foul, wicked man. May he be damned forever and ever. And may God's blessing come upon those who delivered us from the Christ-selling Judas," the priest said in a rattling tenor. All right, Father, we will," promised Colonel Mission, hardly restraining a smile. The 3 fighters went to the village and soon brought the traitor. He was a tall, quite good-looking man of about 45, with a thick reddish beard, neatly trimmed. He wore an old jacket. On his head he wore a cartouche of some pre-revolutionary type with a lacquered visor. The traitor was a little frightened, but he kept himself in control, tried to answer questions calmly, with dignity. Only his eyes from under his bushy eyebrows looked stealthily away from his interlocutor. We kept him in the detachment. As evening fell, we set off again. In an hour we came to a village and stopped to ask the peasants for directions. The detainee asked the guard assigned to him to recuperate, went behind a bush, and started running. The escort did not immediately recognize the traitor and opened fire too late. The traitor managed to escape. The whole squad scolded the lazy escort. The guy didn't know where to go from shame. Sarkisian with a group of Red Army soldiers went in search of the escaped. He returned in the morning, frowning, speechless. The traitor could not be caught. Ahead of Sarkisian, in the darkness he crept unnoticed to his house, took his horse out of the barn and rode away on horseback to the German commandant's office in Kosovo. We had to admit that we had made another mistake. The traitor should have been shot on the spot. His cooperation with the enemy was unquestionable. But we showed inappropriate sensitivity. We decided to hand him over to the judicial and investigative authorities. I advised the communists to have another talk with the soldiers about vigilance. I myself also had a few short talks on the same subject. It was very difficult to conduct political work without newspapers or radio. The fighters were waiting for explanations on the most worrying issues, and I myself could only guess about many things. That is why everyone will understand my joy when scouts brought the news that in one of the villages in the house of a teacher there was a radio receiver. I immediately went there with a few Red Army men. The receiver was homemade. The teacher used to be fond of radio engineering. We crowded round the table, and the master switched on his apparatus. We heard characteristic rustles, scraps of music, mumbled German speech, and then it came out clearly. Moscow speaking. We are transmitting the latest news. I took out a notebook from my field bag and began to hastily write down the bulletin of the Soviet Informbureau. In the bulletin it was reported that during the night of 22 July there were persistent battles in the Pskov, Polotsk-Nevelsk, Smolensk, Novograd-Volynsk directions. Then I wrote down reports about the great labor upsurge in factories and plants of the country, about the fact that the miners of the Donetsk and Kuznetsk basins gave the country thousands of tons of coal over the plan. The teacher had a school geographical atlas. From it, with the permission of the master, I took out a map of the European part of the Soviet Union. It was necessary to show the soldiers where approximately the front line was. The whole detachment gathered to listen to my police information. Only the sentries remained in their places. The report of the Sovinformbureau was not particularly comforting in itself, but we were encouraged by the fact that the Soviet army persisted in defending every inch of our native land, inflicting heavy losses to the enemy in manpower and equipment. The next night we made an unprecedentedly long crossing. We crossed our old state border. We passed the house of the frontier outpost. It was empty. The windows were broken. The doors were off their hinges. In the rooms there were fragments of furniture, a lot of torn brochures and newspapers. Beyond the old state border the detachment immediately became easier. Now we met collective farms that had been established back in the 30s. In the first of them we were welcomed as relatives. They fed us well and gave us a guide. A nice old man of about 65. He led us through the swamp, bypassing the German garrisons. The guide told us that before our arrival some suspicious persons in military uniform had visited them. One of them had the insignia of a petty officer on his buttonholes, and the other was wearing a Red Army soldier's uniform. The petty officer demanded 2,000 rubles from the chairman of the collective farm, ostensibly for the needs of the detachment, and ordered to prepare a bath and clean linen. And where are these people now? Sarkisian was interested. They have gone to the neighboring village, which you can't pass by either. Maybe you'll see them there. The petty officer is a good-looking guy, a bushy-haired, white-haired, well-dressed, wearing all the commander's clothes. Well, and the fighter, the shorter one, haircut, a little freckled, keeps silent, keeps aside. Apparently, he is shy. We walked about 10 kilometers through the swamp and really came to the outskirts of the village. As soon as the detachment entered the village, 2 men jumped out of the window of the outermost hut and rushed to the forest. Sarkisian sent 5 fighters in pursuit of them. The unknown men were apprehended. They were the same petty officer and a Red Army man about whom the guide told us. The petty officer smelled strongly of vodka. He behaved impudently and lied without remorse. At first he said that he was in the detachment of some Major Terentiev and had been ordered to prepare a place for 150 people to sleep. Then he began to tell how he had almost fallen into the hands of the fascists, met a Red Army soldier who had fallen away from his unit, and they decided to make their way to the front line on their own. In general, it was obvious that the petty officer was trying to deceive us. I ordered to search him. They found 3,000 rubles in the petty officer's boots. Whose money? Mine. And where did you get the commander's equipment and weapons? I took it from a lieutenant. Where's the lieutenant? He was wounded. So you, scoundrel, left the wounded commander in the woods and even robbed him. I couldn't stand it. You don't shout at me, answered the petty officer defiantly. How could I drag him when he was badly wounded? And he didn't need his uniform. He would die anyway. The marauder was taken into custody. The Red Army soldier who accompanied him confessed that he had lost his unit in a forest battle, walked alone for 3 days, and then met a petty officer. I thought that he was an experienced man. And then it was more fun to go together, said the Red Army man. But I saw that the petty officer was not doing the right thing. I thought of leaving him. But where can you go? It's too bad to go alone. Why did you run away from us? Sarkisian asked. It was night. We were sitting in the hut, drinking, to tell you the truth. The landlady brought us some moonshine. But suddenly the petty officer looked out of the window. The Germans are coming, he shouted. So we ran. And when your men started calling, I came straight back. We consulted and decided to leave the Red Army soldier in our detachment. He had done nothing wrong. And what are we going to do with the marauder? Asked Colonel Mission. I remembered the escaped traitor, and I said firmly, we will not take him with us. Mission bent down, lighting a cigarette over the glass of a paraffin lamp, and said softly, That's right. That's right. Sarkisian supported. You can't spare such people. At dawn, the marauder was shot. I ordered 2 fighters to bury the corpse and catch up with the detachment, which was beginning to pull into the forest. These fighters joined us an hour and a half later, when I was beginning to worry if something bad had happened to them. They'd brought 3 young men in civilian clothes. Comrade Battalion Commissar, we have detained some unknown suspicious types, one of the men reported. So we are following you, like a rear guard, and they are cautiously peeking out from behind the trees. They were watching the movement of the detachment. At that moment, the scouts reported that they noticed civilians in the woods, urban in appearance. I demanded from the detainees to show their documents. A short, dense man of about 35 came forward, grinned. Their own, Comrade Commander, do not doubt. And those whom the scouts met are also our own, from our group. While we were dealing with the detainees, another 40 people approached us without fear. All of them were communists sent by the Central Committee of the party to work behind enemy lines, armed mostly with pistols. Only a few had automatic rifles. We got to talking. The partisans had newspapers. I asked out a few copies of newspapers and organized loud readings in the camp. The partisans reported that the front line was no more than 30 kilometers away. This was confirmed by the locals, who provided us with guides and wagons for the wounded. Through the forests, on little-traveled roads, we came to the place Zapoli. The front line here was not solid, and we did not even notice how we crossed it. Fascist units were only in large settlements and controlled the roads. In Zapoli, there was a small unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Kermishev. He called himself the head of the garrison. As far as I understood, the unit's task was to meet detachments and individual soldiers coming out of the encirclement. We were fed with a good lunch. I was happy to feel that despite all the difficulties and hardships, the goal had been achieved. We had made our way to our own. Only one thing darkened the mood. We were offered to surrender our weapons and ammunition. In return, we were given certificates. Lieutenant Colonel Kermishev said that there was a corresponding order in this regard. It was a shame that we were not fully trusted. The fighters made some noise, got indignant, but all of them surrendered their weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Kermishev sent us to Kalinkovichi. We reached the station Rabkor by an armored train, which was a part of the 6th Armored Division. It was impossible to move further along the railway. The way was cut by the enemy. We went on foot. The men became despondent. We felt insecure, helpless. We had only a few grenades and 2 pistols for the whole detachment. Mission and me. We had to be afraid of meeting even a few fascist soldiers. Fortunately, everything turned out safely. On arrival in Kalinkovichi, the Red Army men were enrolled in the reserve regiment, and the commanders and political workers were ordered to go to Gomel, to the headquarters of the 20th Army. In Gomel, I had to say goodbye to Mission and Sarkisian. They were going to the personnel department of the 20th Army, and I to the political department. We stood for a while on one of the streets, shook hands, and parted in the hope that maybe we would meet again on the front roads. We had become good friends during the last month. Nowhere is the feeling of true friendship so strong as in war. It's not without reason that they say that true friends meet in trouble. But our front roads never came together. I never met Sarkisian again and know nothing about his fate. And I saw Grigory Fotivich Mission only many years later in 1953. At that time, Major General Mission was the chief of communications of the Turkestan Military District. In 1958, he passed away, leaving a bright memory in the hearts of his comrades and colleagues. In Gomel, and later in the headquarters of the Western Front, I tried to find out whether Kolikovich and Lebedev had managed to get out of the encirclement. Nobody could tell me anything concrete. Only after the war, collecting material for this book, I received an official certificate from the archive of the Ministry of Defense, which stated that Colonel Sergei Andreyevich Kolikovich and Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Vasilievich Lebedev died in the battles for the motherland, the former in July and the latter in August 1942.